Okay. Oh, publishing. It looks like on my end it is published. If you go to the assignments tab, you should be able to find it. It's just not published in the modules yet because I haven't had a chance. So I think check the assignments tab. Okay, I'll just publish all the modules too, and I will fix the modules later. So all the modules are not going to be correct at this time. So let me just publish some things. Okay, can you try now? Okay, great. Okay, moving on. So now I'm going to give you, I'm not going to time myself, but maybe I should, give you an example of an REM presentation that you guys might do. And so this is from the class data that we took. And am I sharing screen? I don't know. Is someone on Zoom? Am I sharing? Do you see slides?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, thanks. Okay. So you should introduce yourself. Obviously, you all know me. So, hi everybody. My name is Justin Lowe. Today, I will be talking about grazing at Chagacho, and my project is called "Grazing at Chagacho Does Not Strongly Affect Cover, but Reduces Forb Height." To start with, California rangelands are very important biodiversity hotspots. They're one of California's largest grossing economic sector, and it's actually set our second top grossing product, or supports our second top grossing product. Grazing on rangelands, though, can negatively or positively affect plant communities depending on the environmental context and the management plans. Grazers typically prefer to have eat grass over forbs, and oftentimes we know from past studies that overgrazing can occur with continuous grazing systems because there's constant grazing that results in plant mortality and increased bare ground cover. So to think a little bit more about these questions, we thought very specifically about these research questions. How does continuous grazing on a temperate Mediterranean coastal prairie affect functional group composition? How does continuous grazing affect bare ground and turd cover? And is plant height affected by continuous cattle grazing on this coastal prairie? And we predicted that continuous grazing will result in higher grass cover and lower forb cover. Continuous grazing will increase bare ground and turd cover, and that plant height will be lower with continuous grazing in areas with continuous grazing. To answer these questions, we conducted a study at Chagacho in McKinleyville, California, which is classified as a temperate Mediterranean climate area in coastal prairie habitat. And we assessed community composition, functional group composition, and height in two different treatment groups, which were in an area that were continuously grazed and an area that is ungrazed. We measured plant community composition, identifying plants to life form type, which means grass cover, forb cover, or shrub cover. And we also measured ground cover types like bare ground, as well as cow pies and anything else that we saw in the field. We measured the maximum plant height of the tallest forb and the tallest grass in each of these quadrats. And I didn't update that one, but we collected these data haphazardly in spring 2025 with haphazardly placed quadrats. And I'll explain to you what haphazard is if you don't know later. So our first result, we found that continuous grazing did not affect grass or forb cover. And so it's always good to explain your graphs. On the y-axis here, you can see percent cover of grass or forb. And on the x-axis, you can see whether the treatments, whether it was grazed or ungrazed. And so we did a t-test to test whether or not there were significant differences between these two groups. And we found that grazing did not significantly affect grass or forb cover at this site. And so we found out that our first hypothesis, our first prediction, didn't hold true. We found that continuous grazing also did not necessarily affect ground cover or turd cover. Although you might start to see a trend, it actually looks like there's potentially less bare ground sometimes in the grazed areas. But this is not significant, so we can't really make any conclusions from these results, other than it's not different. And so we also confirmed in this case that continuous grazing does not actually relate to bare ground and turf cover in this area. And then we found that continuous grazing reduced forb height, but not grass height. And there could be a lot of different reasons for this. And so again, on the left side or the y-axis, you see height in centimeters. And on the y-axis, you see the grazing treatments. The box plot on the left, highlighted in green, is grass cover or grass height, and on the right is forb height. And so we see that forb height typically is higher in ungrazed plots compared to in grazed plots, whereas grass height is unaffected. And so we find that there is that our hypothesis is not completely false, but also not completely true. And so I put more text on this than needed, apparently. So continuous grazing in a temperate coastal prairie did not affect. Also, affect is a verb, effect is a noun, just so you know. Cover of different plant life forms, like grasses or forb, or increased bare ground cover or turd cover. This might mean that grazing pressure and stocking rates are appropriate to not degrade the rangelands, even in a continuous grazing system. Likely would be useful to have a citation. Another potential is that we may have further seen differences if we had divided it up by species or by native cover and non-native cover. And a caveat or a limitation of these data and studies is that the data was taken by multiple people that may be less familiar with plant ID and might confuse some forbs that are parallel, have parallel veins and are elongated as grasses, like plantago. Continuous grazing resulted in lower forb cover, but not grass cover. And this is probably because grasses are more adapted to grazing and may have exhibited compensatory growth to grazing compared to forb species. Grass species may have been less palatable as an alternative or have less digestible protein, resulting in cattle targeting forb species more heavily. And again, without species ID, hyperdominant grass or forb species could be driving these patterns more than kind of these larger groups. So in terms of implications, grazing plans at Chagacho do not increase bare ground and do not negatively affect the rangeland, and thus at this point do not necessarily need to be adjusted. Current grazing plans at Chagacho do not seem to favor one plant life form over another, which would likely be ineffective at managing weeds. So that likely means continuous grazing likely will not be useful for managing weeds if it's not favoring anything. Grazing results in lower forb height and indicating that forb species at Chagacho are either grazing sensitive or grass species are grazing tolerant or experiencing compensatory growth. And this is a kind of species specific kind of topic that we didn't explore further in this study. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you. So that's pretty much it. Yes. And then you don't need to clap for me, but you should clap for everybody else. And then here's Peppy, Carl, and Poa. Poa is like 10 times that size now, though. So that is the presentation. And so I'll be timing you as you go through it. And so again, some pointers, I think I already mentioned this. Use descriptive titles for your presentation and results slides that encapsulate the main finding or the project. End with a thank you or a question slide. Don't just end on your discussion slide and just stand there and look at the class. Use a minimal amount of text when possible and know what to say when cued by them. Don't put all the words down on the ground. I mean, don't put all the words down on the slide. Put what you need to remind yourself and for people to understand, and then you can build off of it. In this case, I put more words than needed and would mark myself down for this. So that way you guys could have an example of what is, I mean, I didn't have that many words, but even then that was too many words. Everyone loves pictures. Time yourself ahead of time. You will lose some or lots of points. Some people lose lots of points by going way off the indicated time. So practice. It's also very useful to practice so you don't go too fast. Sometimes people get very nervous when they're presenting, and maybe you have 5 or 4.5 minutes planned, and then you like speed through all of it and you finish in 2.5 minutes. You'll lose a lot of points that way too. So it's really important to practice. Your question, the time that you spend answering questions does not count for your actual presentation time. Any questions? Okay. Yeah.
What was the haphazard sampling?
Sorry, what?
Haphazard sampling?
Oh, yeah. So haphazard sampling is somewhat random. So you're randomly distributing out what your points in a way that is distributed and hopefully capturing points that represent different variations in the habitat. Whereas random sampling, you would be using a random point generator or a random number generator to actually do that. Does that make sense? Any other questions? Okay, good. So next, hopefully I didn't send out an email reminder, but it looks like most people have their laptops. You have yours? Okay. We're gonna work on R for a little bit next, maybe for the next 20 minutes, and then maybe we'll go into some slides after that, to just make sure we stay on track. I also want to we're not gonna have class all next week, so I apologize. I'm gonna be out of town in a conference. I'm gonna record a lecture for Tuesday and Thursday. I would like you guys just to spend time working on your final reports and your presentations. If you are on Zoom, you can also do our stuff right now. And there's no cameras, but you can do our stuff, and if you need help, you can share screen, and I can help you too. If you have already completed all your analyses, then what you should be working on at this point is writing up your results in your discussion section. And so we're going to have about 25 minutes of free time for this. And then in the last 20 minutes, we're going to go over some other slides. And I'm going to take a roll. And if you need help getting started, you can raise your hand and I'm happy to come over. Huh? Oh, it died. I don't know if anyone's using the computer in my lab right now, but